How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another podcast. We have a special guest on today, Brian O'Henghusa, which is Brian O'Hennessy. Brian Hennessy is a coach and he is a nutritionist and he does absolutely amazing stuff. I feel he's a very intellectual man. And yeah, we're going to just speak about a little bit what he does. And yeah, that's it, Brian.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for having me on, Lee, as well. It's good to be here. So we are going to have, what I hope is an informative and valuable chat for anybody listening to this, because that's the main purpose of podcasts in general, I think, is to add some value and give people some takeaways. Because it really bugs me if on podcasts and you're listening to them, people are kind of dancing around vaguely a topic and then there's actually nothing concrete to come out of it. So if you catch me dancing, call me out and say, Brian, give me something concrete and actionable here, and I will hope to do just that.
Can we start with exactly what you do, Brian? Was it a nutritionist thing first and then a coach, or did you start as a coach and then focus on nutrition? What brought you to where you are today, and what is your main focus of your work today?
Yeah, sweet. So as Glenn said, I'm a nutritionist and coach, and nutritionist came first. So when I went to college, I did a bachelor's in human nutrition in UCD, and I generally had a good idea that I wanted to work with people on this kind of one-to-one deeper basis, as opposed to going into something like public health nutrition. And I also had a fairly good idea I didn't want to work with people who are necessarily already very sick. So like in a dietetics point of view. So whereas a lot of my classmates would have gone on and done a master's in dietetics, I was pretty sure I didn't want to do that. So that kind of like funneled me into saying, okay, well, kind of a nutritionist / coach is generally what I'm aiming at here. So once I did my bachelor's, I then did the precision nutrition coaching courses. So a lot of people will have heard of those. They're highly regarded all around the world. So they have a level 1 and a level 2. So I did both of them. And the level 1 was mostly just a recap kind of nutrition science and a little bit of coaching. But the level 2 was really, really formative and really, really exceptional in terms of helping me to be the type of coach that I am. So that is what I give a lot of credit to. And it was, you can have all the kind of nutrition science knowledge and stuff in the world, but if you don't have the communication skills and you don't know how to actually work with people and you don't know about behavioral psychology, you're going to struggle with implementation, which is where people actually get the results. So the best diet in the world means fuck all if someone can't stick to it. And looking at the whole person rather than saying like, oh yeah, just go and eat these foods and then you're done. So I've been working as a coach online since 2017. And I work with a Triage method. So for anyone who doesn't know Triage method, we are a group of nutritionists, personal trainers. I'm not a personal trainer, but we have a multidisciplinary team. So we do online coaching and a lot of educational materials for people in the industry, right? So that's what we spend a lot of time doing. I think it's some of the best information resources out there for coaches, PTs, anybody who wants to learn this stuff better. And I can actually say that, like, not being biased, because I used to consume massive amounts of the Triage content even before I started working with them, right? So I was following them in the industry for a while. They are industry leaders, or we are industry leaders, I should say. So you're not going to find like better kind of educational resources on the internet when it comes to stuff related to training, stuff related to nutrition, and all of that stuff, all that other stuff that comes with it. So currently I'm the head of nutrition, the nutrition department within Triage method. So myself and my coaching team, work with people on a one-to-one basis online, and that is what I spend most of my time doing.
So from that, I thought you mainly would have worked with clients, but it seems like you're working a lot with coaches. So are you training coaches to get in better shape, or are you training coaches to become better coaches?
We do like both. So I do have a lot of like clients that are not coaches, right? But say we have our educational platform, which is the Coaches Corner. So that would be a service like, either for people who are just very, very interested in this stuff, or people who are actually professionals and want to upskill. So we have that, but then we also have the actual one-to-one coaching service. So you can work with me, for example, as on the nutrition only side of things. Well, I say nutrition only, it's really everything except I'm not giving you a training program, really, because we look at everything, stress and sleep management and basically everything that's going on in your life. So no, I do have, like, I spend most of my time coaching one-to-one clients, and I do get a lot of people who are professionals in the industry, because they need help with stuff as well. And then it can overlap into kind of a supporting mentoring role in that there too. But really we're thinking about like two separate services, like the Coach's Corner, which is the education platform for professionals, and then the coaching service, which is where I spend most of my time. So it is mostly working with people on that one-to-one basis. And like, I work with a really wide range of people. I don't like to put myself in like a box and saying like, oh, I only work with, people aged 20 to 21 and, guys and who just want to add 10 kilos of muscle in the next 6 months. Like, I don't like to pigeonhole myself in any sort of way. So, I work with athletes. I work with people who just want to improve body composition. I work with people who are looking for improvements in their health. Maybe they have a certain condition like IBS, digestive issues, or maybe PCOS, so some hormonal issues there. And then also like girls looking to regain their period if they've lost that, for the many reasons that can happen. And then if I had to put myself in a bit of a niche, it's probably in the last few years this kind of disordered eating space, and where people have issues with, say, binge eating, food fear, like, I can't eat that food because, it's terrible for me, etc., etc. That kind of space where people have like very little freedom, like physically and mentally, when it comes to food. So I've been doing a lot of that work in the last few years, just because I'm very interested in psychology anyway. So that's where it most overlaps, I suppose, in the nutrition space.
That's a very interesting one, the disordered eating and kind of having fear of certain foods. I've heard this so many times with clients that have come to my gym from other coaches, that the coach nearly pushes some of that on them. So when they are part of someone that's, maybe doing a transformation, an 8-week transformation, the coach will be texting them on a Saturday night if they've seen them having a pizza or seen them going out for a couple of drinks, saying, what are you doing? You've got to shoot in 8 weeks, or you've got a transformation in 6 weeks, or whatever the case may be. Do you ever get people coming to you saying that? Like, it's happened. I know it's happened a lot to me. So I don't know if you work with them on as a personal level with me. When they're in the gym, maybe they feel more comfortable to tell me that. But has anyone ever told you that online, where they feel like a coach has kind of pushed them or told them you're not allowed to eat this, you're not allowed to eat that, or blasted them maybe for eating certain foods? Like,
yeah, it does happen, all right. And like, fortunately and unfortunately, but a lot of the people I work with, like, it's like picking up the pieces coaching. So a lot of people that I work with have been through either some fad crap approaches, either by themselves or with other people. And it's like, they obviously haven't had good long-term success with those quick fix approaches, right? It's no surprise. If it's a quick fix, it quickly falls apart, right? And that's where a lot of people are coming from. And if we dissect like why that is, like why do those coaches do that? It's like, well, this person has signed up for a very brief period of time, and their business model is delivering like as much as possible in terms of, quote unquote results. Because I say quote unquote results because, do we really care about the results if the person is left a lot worse off afterwards, right?
The result is basically just the fat loss on the picture, rather than the person having long-term sustainable results, like actually feeling better, looking better, and being able to continue that method for the rest of their lives. Like,
yeah, so that coach knows that, okay, this person, to get these kind of fantastic results, so to speak, this person needs to be in a pretty significant deficit over this period of time. So they know that they have to basically force that upon them. So it's where you get these kind of low calorie meal plans, and this is why the range of foods that they can eat is so narrow, because they know that it's like, okay, if you eat this narrow range of foods, you're probably not going to go over calories, or the deficit is not going to be even too small. And there's a greater likelihood that you're going to get this transformation that I'm looking for as a coach in that situation. So like they're under pressure, they're putting the client under pressure, and they know like that if the client has a few weeks of, you know, not being in a huge deficit, then over an 8-week period, they're probably not going to get this kind of crazy result that they're after. And it's really annoying. I suppose the most annoying part for me is that people come in with expectations of like, that's how it should be. And, you know, I've had clients say to me before, it's like, because we nearly have to talk to everybody about their expectations in the beginning. And it's like, I had a girl say to me recently that like, if she wasn't losing 4 kilos a week, that's not good enough. And it's like, who is out there losing 4 kilos a week? Like that's an outstanding rate of weight loss. And I think when we did the maths on it, like I did a bit of the maths with her, and it was like, okay, you'd have to be like eating nothing every day and doing like an extra 500 calories of exercise on top of what you're already doing to actually generate that much fat loss. Just to put it in perspective. So people's expectations of what good progress is in that context can be a bit wild. And a lot of that, like a lot of the blame for that is put on these kind of quick fixes. Cause like, you know, well, my friend did this 8-week transformation and she lost, 10 kilos or whatever it is. And it's like, well, now if I don't lose 10 kilos in 8 weeks, I'm doing something wrong. And I'm not like, there must be something wrong with me, or I'm failing somehow if I can't do that. Whereas like, yeah, fair enough, your friend maybe did lose 10 kilos, but talk to her in 8 weeks time after that, and where is she at? Like she's probably put most of that back on, if not more, you know. So the industry portrays a certain image, obviously, and you know that's nothing groundbreaking for me to say that, but you kind of have to think about, you know, what else is going on. Like, so where is the person in the after photo? Like, how are they doing? How are they mentally? Because, you know, a lot of this podcast is about mental health, right? So how are they mentally after that period of time? They probably haven't built any habits that they're going to be able to use long term, and they probably haven't learned anything, because all they've learned how to do is, you know, eat this kind of meal plan and kill themselves in training. And then once they're not doing that, what happens? You know, they don't know what to do. So there's a lot to be said for how some of these things are done in the industry, I think. And I know you guys would agree with that as well.
Yeah. One of the scariest things I hear from clients is I only lost 1 pound this week. When you hear that, you know that the expectations have been wrong, or have been fed to them wrong, and what they see and what they believe now is kind of distorted a little bit, because to lose 1 pound in any given week is an amazing result.
Yeah. And then actually another point I'd like to add to this is that I've had people in the past where all their basis of success in, say, a week is all about the weight that they lost. So I've had clients apologize to me for not losing either weight or for not losing enough weight, you know, based on these previous kind of programs that they've been on, because in this kind of protocol that we're talking about here, it's all based on like how much weight you lose. Like, oh, you lost 2 kilos this week, you're a great person, well done. You didn't lose 2 kilos this week, you know, what's going on here? You're obviously not doing the program right or whatever. Whereas that's completely bogus. And you know, when I talk to people about this, they're kind of like blown away. It's like, oh, right, you're not just praising me for whether I lose weight or not, you know, as a coach. It's like it's kind of new to them, and it's like, well, that should never really be what you praise. You should praise the things they're actually doing on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis. You know, are they going to training sessions? Are they eating vegetables? Are they getting enough sleep? Do they manage a stressful situation this week? All that stuff is what's important. And then, you know, the weight loss comes as a side effect, fine, but you actually have to look at praising behaviors rather than outcomes, because as we all know, you're not going to be able to control how much weight you lose every single week unless you're on one of these crazy programs that is just set up so that you can't help but lose tons and tons of weight. But then again, this leads into those unrealistic expectations and leaving people in a worse place than they were at the start.
Do you ever get people that obsess too much over the scales and have to take them away from it? Because I've had that a few times where I'd have to go like, look, let's just not weigh ourselves for 8 weeks. Like, let's just forget about that for a while. You know, we'll just try and put some health markers in here, and then we'll take a picture now and a picture in 8 weeks, and we'll see how we've got on. Because some people weighing themselves 2 and 3 times a day, it becomes a really unhealthy obsession, and they need a break away from that to kind of kind of gather their thoughts and move forward in a healthier manner. Like,
Yeah, no, it does happen, all right, and it's a case that, again, they're usually coming from that place of overvaluing like body weight basically as a metric for success. So, you know, again, if they're coming from a place where a coach has been praising them for their weight loss and they've never heard them praise them for like, oh, you did really well, like eating fruit and veg this week, you know, then yeah, that's all they associate with like getting kind of gold stars is if they lost weight or not. And then therefore, if that's all the coach was focused on, then that's all they will focus on as a client. And they just kind of learn that behavior, and they just go ahead and say like, you know, it's all about whether I lost weight or not and how much did I lose. Now part of this, like, this may not be down to bad coaching, maybe kind of wider in terms of diet culture and things like that, but you know, we're taught to overvalue body size and shape as, you know, I'm a more worthy person if I'm smaller, basically. So if people can then use their body weight and how much that changes or not as a metric for their self-worth, that's where a lot of that comes into it as well. So kind of having low body image, or it's kind of having all your eggs in the body weight, what I look like basket, and then ignoring and neglecting other parts of your life that are actually important as well for, you know, your well-being.
As a nutritionist, your main focus obviously going to be on correcting the diet or trying to fix or make people feel a little bit better. Will there be any kind of like specific things, or will there be, you know, maybe 3 things that you go, this is what we want to try and control first, like we need to eat more fruit and veg or try and get more protein in, or I suppose it could go either way for some people. For some people it could be trying to include a takeaway once a week, and for some people it could be trying to cut it from 7 to 3 or 7 to 5, like, you know. Is there anything that you kind of find the most common that people could just change to make themselves feel a little better? Like, you know, for me, I don't really like eating fruit and veg, so I tend to make them into shakes, like use my NutriBullet and get them through that way. Is there things like that you find would just benefit people from basic nutrition that they can help themselves feel better? Like,
yeah, like as I said, it kind of depends on the person, and you know, for one person eating a cookie is the win, and for another person not eating the cookie is the win. So like but in general terms, yeah, there's usually trying to get someone's protein intake higher, you know, for all the reasons that is good for them. Most people are not eating enough in a lot of cases. So, you know, people think about protein and they just think about like, you know, muscle and recovery and stuff, but like most of your body that isn't water or bone is made of amino acids, right? And where do you get amino acids? You get it from protein rich foods. So you're not going to be as healthy as possible if your protein intake is insufficient. This is especially important in more elderly populations. You know, loss of muscle mass and loss of muscle strength as people get older is a big issue. And, you know, actual muscle strength is one of the biggest predictors of like longevity and independence in older individuals. And it's just because like things like appetite drop off as people get older. People don't we don't digest protein quite as well. So, you know, elderly people need to arguably like more protein than the average person, right? But they end up eating way less, and you know, that affects immune function, that affects kind of like bone health and just general strength and faculty to go about their day. So that's like just to take it away from just like aesthetics and, you know, being a big strong lad, and like that's what protein is for. Like it goes way beyond that. So, and then like it does have benefits for people who are trying to improve their body composition because it's really filling. It's good for, you know, stabilizing energy levels across the day. So generally just have a better time when you're eating enough protein. It's one of the things that's most commonly needs work when I start with somebody. Another one would be the fruit and veg thing, as you said, right? Because
just before you move on from protein, you know what a big challenge for people is when you say protein, they always think it's meals that they have to cook straight away themselves. And people that, especially in the older people, let's say, who are just having kids and starting to have kids and starting to have families, and maybe their careers are quite busy. Is there any simple things you use to help people get more protein in? So maybe cooking the night before, which even some people can struggle with, or getting protein milk or protein bars or eggs, things like that. Is there any kind of methods that you will go, like, if you're struggling with this will be a good way to help, like good way to kind of get it in?
Yeah, so like if we maybe briefly consider what a typical diet might look like for a day and for somebody. So they might have like porridge or cereal or something for their breakfast, all right? Then they might have maybe a sandwich, crisps or something for their lunch, maybe a piece of fruit there. And then they'll usually have like maybe just say meat and 2 veg or something for dinner. So when you look at that sort of template, immediately what you have is a low protein breakfast and a low to moderate protein lunch. So that's what I would look to address first, because a lot of dinners are going to be reasonable in terms of protein content, and that's usually where people are going to do their best, like in a day, if they're coming from a position of not knowing too much about nutrition, right? So I would generally look at breakfast first. Like, okay, well, and I'm very much of the opinion in terms of like when I'm coaching people, I'm not like, I don't want someone to go from having cereal to having like salmon and kale like for breakfast. Like that's way too big a jump. You don't need to do that. I like to start with where somebody is at right now and see how we can tweak that to make it a bit better, mostly through inclusion rather than exclusion. So there's going to be a lot more of me saying, hey, try adding this in rather than, hey, take this away, right? So for that breakfast example, really easy ones, like you could, I'm a big fan of like high protein yogurts and stuff to help people get protein in, because they're so convenient. Like they are literally ready to go. Obviously you just need to keep them in the fridge or whatever, but you know, those Kvargs or the protein yogurts out of Aldi and Lidl, the Skier yogurts, any of the 0% fat, like Greek style yogurts, all of them are super high in protein. And they fit in quite well. You know, it's easy enough to pair that up with like porridge or something, or even those, you know, protein puddings, like the Everest ones or the MyQ ones you get in Aldi, for example. So it's really easy to say, okay, you know, have your normal porridge breakfast and have one of these yogurts as well. Boom, done. You could maybe have a protein shake. You could maybe stir a scoop of protein into your oats. You could maybe add like some liquid egg whites into that and stir it in. Any of those are good options, but they're very, very easy to do, and they don't change the person's meal that much or their habit that much. It's just like, oh, I'm just going to add this yogurt, and then, hey, that's covered now. And then at the lunchtime example, you know, if they're having a sandwich, right, there's only so much protein you can fit into a sandwich, even if it is an actual good protein source, like, you know, turkey or tuna or something like that. So again, maybe you just have a yogurt as like, or a pudding or something as a like dessert with that. Okay, that instantly brings up the protein content. Maybe you have something like a protein bar, or a protein milk, or even regular milk. Like realistically, it's not that much more protein in protein milk versus regular milk. It's just, I like, for myself, I just enjoy the fact that there's chocolate milk versus regular, right? So I love the chocolate protein milk, and I drink a lot of that. Mostly because it's chocolate and not just because it has like 7 extra grams of protein or whatever. So those are some good ways to go about it. And again, they don't require too much intervention. Like that person does not need to go and like cook an extra 2 meals a day to do the things that I just said, right?
That can be very difficult for people, and that's where a lot of coaches do push that, or food companies and stuff. It's all about prep. Look at me, I'm prepping, I have all these meals, I've got 25 meals lined out on the counter. But that's probably not likely that people are going to stick to that for the rest of their lives, or be able to include that for the rest of their lives, or for a year even, where adding a protein yogurt and eating that maybe on the train on your way, even if you don't have time with breakfast, is such a simple thing that people can change. It's going to add probably anywhere between 15 and 20 grams of protein to their breakfast, and then the same at lunch. Like,
yeah, and then you're instantly in a much better position than you were before that. Like I think the meal prep is definitely useful, and if that's a habit that people can get into, you know, because if they are going to be cooking in the first place, you know, during the week, then they may as well do a bit of meal prep like on a Sunday or something. Like if you spend 1 or 2 hours doing that, you probably save yourself like probably the guts of an hour a day, you know, for like, let's say you cover 3 days and you probably save yourself, you know, an hour each day.
You're not starting from fresh with each meal. Like, you don't have to re-cook everything or start from fresh. I just mean it is a great way for people that maybe have the time to do that. But for people that don't, they don't need to feel like I have to do that to be able to, you know, get in better shape or eat better or just get more protein in. They don't have to do that. If you have time and that suits you, amazing, great protein options you can get in there and great vegetables you can add to it too. But if you don't, you're sitting on the outside looking, going, oh, I can never do that. I haven't got the time. I've got kids running around me. I can't take it cooking that whole meals for the week or whatever. You can still get your protein in through the methods that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, like I'm really opposed to wearing it as a badge of honor that I spent like 6 hours in the kitchen every day this week, like to make everything from scratch. I'm really opposed to that because it becomes a limiting factor. Like people can never get into the game if they think that those are the rules of play. That, you know, if I'm not cooking everything from scratch, then there's no point. So I'm all about as convenient as possible, as much as possible. Right. And look, one consideration, I suppose, that the more convenient something is, generally the more you're going to pay for it. Right. So that is a consideration. So people maybe are time poor, but can afford to spend more money on these more convenient foods. And that's great. Just to be aware that there is that kind of trade-off, you know, like you can get those, you know, the lentil pouches and like the feed pouches. And they're essentially like just several servings of veg. Like you heat up in the microwave and it gives you like 1 meal's worth of food, and you probably add something else to it. But, you know, they are expensive. Like they're a few euro a portion, I think. And then if you look at what's actually in it and what it would cost you to make it yourself at home, you know, it's way different.
Yeah, you're off making it.
But
that's like the yogurts you were saying, they're a very cheap, inexpensive, effective way to get protein in. The fruit and veg thing does tend to be a little bit more expensive if someone else is preparing it for you. Like if you were to buy a whole pineapple, chop it up yourself and put it in the freezer, you could probably nibble on that throughout the week. Where if you buy a little plot of pineapple that someone else has chopped up, you'll get 6 pieces for like €4.
Yeah.
So
maybe there is that trade-off. Like
you were about to pass on to the fruit and veg there before I interrupted you and asked you more questions about protein.
No worries.
Looking there, like, you know, the general guidelines of people trying to get some 5 pieces of fruit in a day, or what would you be looking at with this?
Again, it depends where the person is starting from. So if you're starting from 2 servings of fruit and veg a day, I'm not going to say to you, all right, well, 8 is actually where you need to be, so let's go for that. Like you need to set it in kind of smaller steps so people aren't overwhelmed by how much ground they have to cover. So if you're starting at 2 per day, well, okay, let's see, can we get up to 4 per day of fruit and veg? And that's already 100% improvement, right? So yeah, this can be a little bit trickier for people, but some of the best ways you can go about this, again, so if we take that same kind of daily template that I'm talking about, right? So you've got your porridge in the morning. We've now decided you're adding a protein yogurt to that, and that's great, right? So that's that box ticked. You know, I kind of give people some stick about like the 6 blueberries they put onto their porridge, like in the morning. So I encourage people to really go hard at eating fruit with that meal. So, you know, if you see me eating porridge for breakfast, which I do quite often, I have a separate bowl of frozen fruit, like that I just blast in the microwave to defrost it and then eat that with my porridge. So, you know, the bowl of fruit is as big as the bowl of porridge. All right. So that's how I want people to think about this. Like, it's not just like your little soft fistful of berries in there. Obviously that's better than nothing, but I want people eating a lot of this stuff. So, and you're going to be so much more full as well, right? And you're going to get lots of nutrients and lots of fiber and stuff. So like there's tons and tons of benefits to this. So just like, you know, the frozen fruit is a great way to do it because it's quite cheap, especially when like berries and stuff are not in season. Yeah, like the bags, I do most of my shopping in Aldi, like, but I know like other like Dunn's and stuff are more expensive for the frozen fruit, I've noticed, but Like you get a kilo bag of like 4 berry mix in Aldi for very, very cheap. And I think the same in Lidl as well. And I'll have like 300 grams of that with a meal. And it's like, that's a lot. Like people don't have to be having that much, but if you're starting from 6 berries to, maybe 100 grams or something, that's a big improvement.
That's just one thing I found with them. Just it lasts longer. If you go and buy, if you only can make it to the shops once a week, by the end, if you bought enough berries to do you fresh, by the end of the week, they'll probably be the ones that it'll be gone off by the time you hit Saturday, Sunday, or Friday even. Where if you buy them frozen, it doesn't matter. By the end of the week, you're still going to have them there. Like,
yeah, absolutely. And you can get, it doesn't have to be berries. Like you can get frozen pineapple, frozen mango. There's lots of different options. And like it's all good. Like just whatever you like, go for it and eat lots of it. Right. No one ever had any problems from eating too much fruit. So real easy way, and like it tastes nice as well, and it goes well with, say, the yogurt or whatever. You want to throw some yogurt on top of that. Maybe you have a snack or a meal there. Instantly it takes like 2 minutes, whatever it takes to defrost the fruit. Like that's all it takes to prepare. Then for people having lunches, then again, it's like if this person is just having like sandwich and a bag of crisps, okay, now they're having their protein milk, or they're maybe having a fill bar or whatever. So the protein content is better. Well, like they can easily add like an apple or a pear or a banana or something to that, right? Another good one I like for people in that sense is like getting soup, so you can either buy cartons of soup, they just heat up and they're ready to go. Or again, if you have time to make a batch of soup at the start of the week, or at the weekend, like for the following week, then just bring that with you in a flask or something, and like right away you have an extra serving or two of vegetables that you weren't having before.
That's an interesting one. I'll just ask you on that, because people will see soups and go, if I buy soup in a shop or something that I just have to heat up, it's probably shite that's full of salt. There's nothing actually in that. Is there certain like things you'd avoid, or would you go most your kind of soups out there are generally okay, or what way would it work there?
Yeah, no, it's a valid concern, and some of them are either high in salt or high in fat or both, right? So if they've added a lot of like cream or something to them to make them taste nicer, or a lot of salt to them to make them taste nicer and help preserve it, like, yeah, it does tend to be, it can be higher in definitely salt, and then maybe fat as well than something you might make at home, right? So again, these are kind of trade-offs that you're making. Is it better for you? Like, are you gonna continue on saying, well, there's no point in me buying that soup, so I'll just not have anything, right? If it's a choice between making it yourself and having that soup, probably better off buying the soup and just having it, so you're getting the vegetables rather than just not having it.
Yeah, right? It's an interesting one, because I eat soups myself, and I just know, I've heard so many people over the years go, oh, that's shite, it's full of salt, it's not worth it. So that's why I always wanted to ask from someone that's more experienced in a nutrition background than me, what your thoughts were on it,
Yeah, so it is worth checking the label and seeing, hey, how many calories and how many, say, grams of fat and stuff are in this soup. Because like I got one there recently, and my girlfriend had a little bit, and she's like, oh, that's lovely, and then she checked the label, and there was like 20 grams of fat in it, and I was like, oh, that's probably why. So that's a bit excessive. Like, however, you can get ones that are lower in fat, so just look at the label, and just be aware that, like, you're maybe going to operate off the assumption that you're going to eat the whole thing if it's like a single serving container or whatever. So just make sure you differentiate between like the kind of nutrients per serving and the nutrients per like 100 grams, because it may tell you like, oh, there's actually 2 servings in this pot, which realistically you might just eat the whole thing. So just to be aware of that. But no, it's not it is true in a lot of cases, like it could have a lot of salt in it, it could have a lot of fat in it. So just have a little look at the labels that are there. Try and pick one that's, lower in fat and maybe lower in salt than the others, right? Because then you're just going to have and that only takes a couple of seconds, like, looking at the nutrition labels. And it's good to get into the practice of doing that anyway, so you get a better understanding of nutrition and everything else. So you mentioned as well yourself, like you like to make smoothies, right, and stuff, and just kind of blitz stuff in the NutriBullet. So that's another good way to get more fruit and veg in. Just make a smoothie out of it, and you can flavor it with like fruit, or you can flavor it with like protein powder or a lot of other things, Bolero sachets, even my waddy and stuff. You add a little bit of that to it. That'll add like a significant amount of sweetness and flavor to it. So, you know, if that works for you and you can have a smoothie with your breakfast or with your lunch, you know, you're instantly getting, or as a snack, like, you know, I'm just kind of using examples here, but feel free to like expand on what I'm saying and use it as you see fit. But that's a really easy way. And again, those meals are going to be the ones that tend to be lower in those nutrients or those kind of food types. And then dinner, someone might have, you know, the meat and potatoes and one or two veg. So that could be what you look at last. But at the same time, a lot of people will just have like these brown meals where it's just like the browned meat and the potatoes and then nothing else. And, you know, that makes me a bit sad. So, you know, try and add some side of vegetables there. You know, you can get, like, again, there's a huge amount of options for like convenience. So you can get, you know, carrot and parsnip mash, like that's ready, you just heat it up in the microwave. You can get kind of stir fry veg that's already chopped free and shit, and you just throw it in the pan. Microwaving vegetables, like you can steam vegetables in the microwave really easily, so either from fresh or frozen. So, you know, if you chop up some broccoli and put it in like a little bit of water and cover it and put it in the microwave for like 2 to 3 minutes, it's essentially steamed. All right. That's one that I will do a lot because, you know, it makes it really, really quick. And then just looking at ways to just, you know, you ask yourself the question, like, is there a fruit and vegetable in this meal? And if the answer is no, ask yourself, okay, how can I actually change that then? And then get into the habit of ticking that box where it's like, it's almost like not a proper meal, so to speak, unless you have some fruit and veg and a source of protein with it, right? You know, I talk a lot about this kind of mental checklist that you go through when you're looking at a meal. It's like, all right, you know, is there a source of protein here? Check. Is there a fruit or a vegetable or both? Check. And it's like, okay, well then, you know, you've covered the most important things probably. And, you know, there's other stuff you can add to that checklist, but they're the, like we're saying, they're the two that are often lacking for most people, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, and just simple kind of basic changes that people can make to make themselves feel better and be healthier and live a healthier lifestyle. Moving away from just like actual food for a second, well, I suppose it does come in food. I want to ask you about creatine because it's something that I've used for years, lads have used for years, a few of our clients have used for years. But the odd time you do get people that are still scared of it and they kind of go, oh no, you know, someone told me not to use this, or people said don't take that. Can you just explain to people what actually goes on with creatine and if there is or isn't any kind of negative side effects to it?
Yeah, of course. So as I said to you before we started, I used to work in a sports nutrition and supplement shop there in Clontarf, like Body First Nutrition. So I've heard all sorts of things from people who come in and say, yeah, no, I wouldn't touch that creatine stuff. Like my mate's bones dissolved after he took that. And it's like, yeah, wow. Like, and you obviously have to kind of humor them a little bit, like, Jesus, yeah, he was boneless after taking creatine. That's mad. So anyway, like, yeah, there seems to be a lot of misconceptions around creatine. Like, and that's assuming like you're buying a reputable brand that's like not spiked with SARMs or something. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So maybe there's that consideration, but I think that's harder to come across than it is easy to come across, right? So most brands that you're going to get in a shop, be it online or not, are going to be what they say they are. But now creatine supports essentially the energy pathways in the body. It helps replenish ATP levels. So ATP is just energy currency in the body, right? Everything like food wise ends up as ATP, like when you go through enough biochemistry. So that's what creatine does. And, you know, it's heralded a lot as a performance enhancing supplement, right? Which is fair, because when you are, say, lifting weights, your ATP reserves start to diminish because you're using them up doing the lifting, right? Whereas if you take creatine regularly, you're able to replenish those faster and therefore keep doing more work. So your output improves slightly. And if your output improves slightly, then, you know, you're getting stronger, therefore, you know, building more muscle tissue, et cetera, et cetera. So you might get an extra rep or two in your sets, right? Versus if you weren't taking creatine. It works quite well for, you know, any like athletic endeavors that are short in duration. So say a marathon runner may not get a lot of benefit from creatine in their running, but they're probably, or they should be doing some strength training as well. So it's going to benefit that, right? So that's what creatine is mostly talked about as a performance enhancer, which it does well. It's also really, really cheap, and it's really, really well studied. So it's kind of a no-brainer to use it, right? The only real caveat for creatine and not using it is if you have any sort of underlying kidney dysfunction, right? Because then you may have an issue metabolizing and excreting the creatine, and that can cause problems. So basically, if you have healthy kidneys, you're fine to take creatine. And everybody who does have healthy kidneys should probably take creatine, even if you're not lifting, right? It has benefits, right? It has benefits to the brain, and it has benefits to kind of overall energy levels, as I alluded to. But yeah, cognitive function improves with creatine use generally. And this is especially true in people who have low creatine diets. So you naturally do get some creatine in, say, meat and fish, right? But if you take someone who's a vegan and is not consuming any meat or fish, their creatine reserves are going to be lower than someone who's omnivorous, right?
Just on that subject, what can we kind of get in natural terms? Like what foods will be the highest in it? Like just to compare to people, because if you tell someone to take 5 grams a day and they think it's the scariest thing in the world, but potentially I think is a steak maybe has 3 grams. So if you had a steak, are you going to die, or are your bones going to dissolve? You know what I mean? Like, are you familiar with any foods that would be high, or what's actually in them?
Yeah. So beef is one of the richest sources, and other red meats, and then like salmon and other fish can be reasonably high in creatine, but it takes quite a lot of those foods to get up to that effective dose. So I don't think there's as much as 3 grams in a steak. I think you'd have to eat like probably half a kilo of red meat a day to maybe get like 3 grams or so, which could be done. Those figures are off the top of my head, but so they may not be exact, but you do have to eat quite a lot of red meat to try and get that amount in, which a lot of people aren't going to do.
Yeah, but just to understand that it is possible, and people possibly have done this.
Yeah,
but they'd be scared to take the supplement.
Yeah,
even though it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, another example of that, just while we're on it, is that people will be opposed to taking supplements for whatever reason. But if you're eating fucking breakfast cereal that's fortified with iron or B vitamins, where do you think those come from? Like they're just supplements that are added to your food so that you can't run into these nutrient deficiencies because you're being pig-headed about taking supplements. So the government and public health services kind of cut you off at the source and make sure you don't do yourself harm by neglecting these certain things, right? So a lot of the most commonly consumed foods, like cereals and breads and milk, like all tend to have a certain amount of fortification to make sure on a population level, like people aren't ending up deficient in these foods. Like, for example, today, right, I trained this morning, I have a match later, so I've been consuming a lot of not really simple carbohydrates, but a lot of carbohydrates, right? So I had a massive bowl of cereal after training this afternoon, and it told me on my fitness pal afterwards, like, oh, you've hit your iron targets for the day. It's like, it's because iron is added to those cereals because we don't want people running into iron deficiencies, but those foods are not inherently iron rich. It's just supplements added to it, and then you eat them. So that's another one. Like, if you're eating fortified foods, you're taking supplements basically. So what were we saying? I was talking about creatine. So especially in vegans, it shows like quite significant improvements in mental function. They're using creatine now in studies to look at depression as well, in like higher doses than the standard, 5 grams a day. So they're doing like 15 grams a day, as far as I'm aware. So that's very interesting, I think, that people are having results in terms of depressive symptoms by taking those high doses of creatine. So that tells you that there's something going on there at the brain level that is good. That's mostly in women, as far as I know. The studies are being done in, but I'm sure they will do them in men at some point. And then one of the other, so there's the kidney issue, and then one of the other things that comes up a lot with creatine as a reason not to take it is people are worried about losing their hair, right? So that's another kind of misconception about creatine, that it contributes to hair loss. And this comes from one small study that done in rugby players that found that they had increased levels of DHT, which is a hormone kind of offshoot of testosterone. It's made from testosterone, right? And it's an androgen, so like a male hormone, but found that the increased levels of DHT and increased levels of DHT are associated with hair loss. But there's a lot of issues with that study that it's kind of hard to, it's only one study for starters, but it's kind of hard to conclude based on what they looked at that creatine would contribute to hair loss, because they didn't see an increase in testosterone. So if there wasn't an increase in testosterone, then it's probably not contributing. And also the group that saw the increase in DHT, just they had a lower level at baseline than the other group. So they just moved from like low end of normal, like higher up in the normal spectrum. So it wasn't like they suddenly got like massively elevated levels of DHT or anything. There is a study going on at the moment, I think, it's heavily delayed by COVID, that is actually looking at this specifically. So I'll be interested to see what that comes back with. But based on what we have to go on, I'd be fairly confident that creatine is not going to cause hair loss, again, provided it is actually creatine and not like, SARMs or something like mixed in there. Now, of course, if someone is concerned about this, then they have to consider that and like weigh up the pros and cons. But yeah, very unlikely that it's going to negatively affect your hair, is what I would say.
So in general, it's a positive, and most people should be taking it even if they're not training.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah. You touched on a little bit there with the kind of creatine and depression thing. I seen you had a post recently where you were talking about diet and depression in a book that you read. Can you give us a quick kind of lowdown on that? What did you learn about kind of the diet and depression and the links, or what could be causing negative effects for people in terms of lowering their mood, and what could be kind of helping their mood through their diet?
Yeah, absolutely. So that book was called Brain Changer by a lady called Felice Jacka, who is a nutrition psychiatry researcher in Australia, right? So there's this sort of, well, in the nutrition field, there's a famous trial called the SMILES trial. And that's an acronym for something. I can't remember what it is, but they fucking love acronyms that like match up with like the theme of the study as well. Like I think that's what scientists spend most of their time doing, is trying to come up with a cool trial name. So the M probably stands for mood or something. I can't remember what it was, but this is one of the first trials that looked at like specific interventions for people with severe depression on from a nutrition standpoint. So up until then, most of the research on like nutrition and mental health / mood was mostly observational. So rather than like in an intervention where it's like, Lee, Glenn, here's what you're going to do for the next 6 weeks, go and do that, and then we'll kind of retest everything. Observational research is more like, okay, Lee, Glenn, do what you're doing for the next 6 weeks, and then, or for the last 10 years, whatever it is, and let's see what you were doing and then how your mood is, right? That's kind of very like kind of a simple differentiation between the two types of research. But it was one of the first ones where I was like, okay, I'm actually telling you what to do here. And what they used was a modified Mediterranean diet. The book is basically about this body of research, right? I was pretty familiar with the trials when I read the book, and then it was kind of some of the way through, I was like, oh, this lady is actually the lead researcher on those studies, right? Which I didn't realize when I started reading it. But yeah, they use this thing called the modified Mediterranean diet. So Mediterranean diet is like the golden child of all diets in like nutrition research, right? It's implicated in positive effects in nearly everything, like in particular cardiovascular health, so like reducing risk of heart disease and stuff. But I say that this is something I say a lot, but generally for whatever kind of health concern you have, it's usually the same diet kind of template that is going to improve that for you. So it's like whether you want to improve your mood, whether you want to reduce cancer risk, whether you want to improve your cardiovascular disease risk, it's basically all the same kind of a template, right? Which falls back to like some what may be like kind of boring guidelines at this stage, because like it's not like, oh yeah, you actually have to go and eat bats and that's what's going to actually solve everything for you. Like we know that doesn't go well, right? Pretty confident in that. So the Mediterranean diet basically looks like big emphasis on quality of fat sources, right? So specifically, they often use like oily fish, right? So this is your sources of omega-3s. So this is going to be things like salmon, mackerel, sardines, kippers, okay, stuff that people don't often eat a lot of, unfortunately, especially not in Ireland. So we can come back to that in a second as to like what to do about that, because it is important. But also fat sources being like avocados, nuts, seeds, and in the Mediterranean diet, they use a lot of extra virgin olive oil, right? So those fat sources are generally quite nutrient dense, right? So there's a lot of like plant nutrients in those foods that are good for us. There's a lot of antioxidants that are good for us, and they tend to be anti-inflammatory as well, right? Versus a lot of the other kind of fat sources that people might consume if they're consuming lots of processed foods, lots of saturated fats, and so on, which are more inflammatory and not as nutritious. So the fat content of the Mediterranean diet is one of the key points. Another one is the fruit and vegetable content, right? So again, this comes up everywhere in nutrition and being healthy. So I know people are sick to death of hearing it, but it's like, make this the time that you hear this, that you actually go and make a change now and start eating more fruit and veg, right? Because it is just good for you. So, you know, it's like, you know, that meme where it's like a cartoon of a fella like, or like he's about to open a book and it's like, you know, how do I lose weight without considering calories, you know, as one example of it. And he opens the book and it's blank. You know, it's kind of like this, like, how do I improve my health and make sure my nutrition is as good as possible, without eating fruit and vegetables? And you open it up and there's nothing there, right? So they're just good for you, right? So please make an effort to eat more fruit and veg. The one they used in this actual trial was, I think it was 6 servings of vegetables and like 3 or 4 servings of fruit a day. That was the recommendation, and that is not to say that everybody hit those targets, because they're lofty enough targets, like, let's be honest. But it did show that moving the needle further in that direction, you know, so just eating more fruit and veg, even if it's not hitting those numbers, was of benefit, right? So there's that plant aspect. There's a lot of whole grains, you know, as your carbohydrate sources, and higher fiber carbohydrates are something that comes up a lot in these dietary patterns. So that's, you know, your brown breads, your whole grain cereals, your oats, brown rice, brown pasta, pulses, you know, so like beans, lentils, chickpeas, all that stuff is really, really good for as carbohydrate sources. Potatoes and sweet potatoes are really good as well. So emphasis on those when you're selecting carbohydrates, rather than the more refined, lower fiber ones. They did have a certain amount of low fat, unsweetened dairy, right? So that was a common feature. Certain amounts of red meat. So I think it was like 4 or 5 servings of red meat a week in this modified Mediterranean diet. The normal Mediterranean diet is a little bit lower in red meat, but they made a change in this because a lot of the nutrients that are found in a large supply in red meat, so things like iron and folate and B12 and the other B vitamins and zinc, right? They're all quite implicated in better mental health. So they said, okay, let's have these people eating a bit more red meat so that they make sure they're getting enough of those nutrients, right? So that was a part of it. So those were the main considerations. Like there was a little bit of red wine thrown in there because that's kind of typical of the Mediterranean diet. And then a lot of fish, again, as protein sources, a lot of eggs, a lot of the low fat unsweetened dairy, as I already mentioned. And then kind of, so eating plenty of that stuff and then not as much more refined processed foods, less processed carbohydrates, less added sugars, and less saturated fat. And taking all that stuff together showed really big improvements for people who did this, and like I said, these people weren't just kind of moderately depressed or like mildly depressed. They were very depressed. They were already undergoing other treatments of some sort. Okay, so they're either using drugs or they're using therapy or they're doing both, right? So it's not like this is the only thing they'd intervened with. And they showed like quite significant improvement in their mood and mental health markers, which is class, I think. Because it shows a big potential for maybe not always simple lifestyle changes, but easy enough to go about. Or no, sorry, they are simple, but then maybe not easy to implement. But if you can just like take that list of things that I said and say, okay, what's top of this list? Let me just go and start with that and see what I can do and give myself a few months to try and build my diet so that it looks more like this. And it can have a potentially big effect, which is great.
It's another interesting one because I think we've spoke to 3 different nutritionists at this point, and I think the Mediterranean diet has come up every time. But I've never seen it on Instagram to promote any sort of health and fitness stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. It's Instagram's all about calories and protein.
Yes, the keto diet is on front of my face every minute of every day. Low carb, all these Atkins diets back in the day and all. Nobody's talking about this diet, but every nutritionist seems to say that it's got some benefits in some way.
Yeah, it's probably because like a lot of the people are pushing diets online are charlatans, or they're like fitness, influencers that have probably never heard of a Mediterranean diet and don't know what it actually entails. Because they're just like, well, it's all about like fitting your macros, and that's kind of as far as they go with their understanding. And those are the people who are getting the most kind of the biggest audiences online, right? Yeah. Whereas nutritionists that are researching this stuff probably aren't as prominent and active online as influencers and stuff would be.
One thing I want to ask you, the kind of binge restrict, I think we kind of touched on it in little bits. Is there kind of things you notice or things that people could change to stop that binge restrict thing, like where maybe restricting every day leading to weekend binges, or restricting every week leading to monthly big binges, you know what I mean? Is there, or restricting all day and leading to an evening binge? Is there anything you would do to kind of help people in that, or kind of help to kind of steady the ship a little bit instead of going so much up and down?
Yeah, so the way I try to reframe it for people, so people come in and they're of the opinion that they have to eat really little because they binge, whereas they binge because they eat really little, right? So for the most part, I like binge eating is quite complex, and there's not like kind of one easy answer for it, but at least in this kind of restriction, like I'm generally eating too little part of it. Eating more, having regular meals throughout the day, and not trying to like save yourself for this binge that comes in the evening, which really is only because you're so hungry because you've eaten fuck all for the rest of the day. Like basically, like the way to resolve binge eating is never more restriction, which is the way most people go about it. And that's the way most people say, oh, right, I keep binge eating like in the evenings or whatever, so I have to restrict to solve that, right? Stop with the restriction, right? The food is not the problem. It's the kind of solution to you not eating enough that you then lose control and end up binging, and and then you start the next day, say, geez, I ate so much last night, I need to fast for the whole day now. And you just stay in that cycle. It's like, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, right? So that's probably the main consideration. Now there's certain binge eating behaviors that come out of restriction of like specific types of foods because they're deemed to be bad or unhealthy or whatever sort of terminology a person might use. And in that case, it's like the typical example is that, like, Lee, you tell yourself, I'm not allowed to eat chocolate because that's bad. Then you inevitably eat some chocolate, and then you tell yourself you failed your diet and you're a terrible person. And then you say, well, fuck it, I've blown my diet now, and once I get back on track, I will resume my food rule of never eating chocolate again, because that's how you've set it up for yourself. Yeah. So I'm never going to eat chocolate again, so I may as well make the most of it now that I have fucked up. And then you go and binge. All right. And some of this then may become an emotionally driven response, because now you feel shit about the fact that you are binging, and you use food as a coping mechanism for that. So there's a big emotional component to binge eating as well, where people use it to make themselves feel better, transiently, or just to numb out so they don't have to actually feel what they're feeling. That's a big issue. Kind of not experiencing emotions and feelings and so they just kind of cover them up with the binge eating, because one of the biggest kind of traits of binge eating is that you are like tuned out, so you're very much not paying attention. It's the opposite of being mindful with your eating. So that can help kind of numb and distract you from any difficult emotions you might be experiencing, at least until the binge is over. And then you probably feel worse. And then if you feel worse, you then continue to binge, because that's how you block out those emotions.
So it seems like it can spiral a bit. So trying to bring your awareness to it and to your emotions and what actually is going on here could be a big way to help yourself, or start to help yourself. Yeah,
it's not a simple fix. And there's several kind of categories of binge eating that I've kind of mentioned them all there, but like there's the not eating enough binging, which is pretty easy to solve. You just, are you on a stupid diet that's overly restrictive in terms of your actual food intake, or is your food selection a bit poor so that you are feeling hungry all the time because you're not making smart food choices so that you're nourished and feeling full? That one's an easy enough one to resolve. But then
that's in the way your first approach right from the start of this podcast would be to look at people's meals and add in rather than take out, because most coaches' method will be to take out. So that could probably lead straight to the restriction and then the binge, because I'm telling you, instead of eating your cereal and just adding the yogurt, or eating your porridge and adding the yogurt and berries and adding to your lunch, I'm telling you to cut it out and only eat chicken and broccoli, and then you're deprived of the stuff that you want to have or that you're used to having. And then it's a kind of recipe for disaster when it comes to binging, that, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And then, like I said already, for a lot of people, the eating is the solution to the problem. It's not the actual problem. So what is the problem? The problem is that you feel stressed, or you feel emotional, or whatever that may be. And then you say, okay, or your body and your brain knows, okay, well, we've used binge eating before to solve this problem, so let's do that. Whereas for a lot of people, it's kind of trying to develop a more expansive array of coping mechanisms for those sort of situations. So you literally have to act like, if your brain and body's beating you to the punch as a problem solver, it's like, oh, don't worry, I got the answer, binge eating, let's do that. You need to kind of step in and say, okay, what other ways could I potentially solve this problem? And like literally write them down and say, okay, what can I do when I'm feeling stressed, or what can I do when I'm feeling emotional? And start trying those other options out, because it's going to be very easy for you to just use food, because if that's what you've been doing for the last 10 years, that's well ingrained as a habit and a way for you to go with that. So you need to start trying other things. Like trying something once and expecting it to just work like that is not realistic. A lot of this stuff takes practice, it takes repetition, but that's the way you want to look at it. And then if there's a more sort of emotional component, a lot of that like comes down to being like more actually present and accepting of how you're feeling rather than panicking and trying to block it all out, right? So yeah, I know. I mean, I could spend a couple hours talking on that alone. So it is quite complicated at times, depending on the situation of the person. But basically, view it as the solution and not the problem, and then start to work back from there. All right. So it's the eating is not the problem; it's the restriction that's the problem, or the eating is not the problem; it's the emotional flexibility. That's the problem. The eating is not the problem. It's the coping mechanisms and the lack thereof that is the problem. Okay. So if there's kind of one takeaway from this, it's like the eating is the solution. Go and see if you can identify what the problems are then and see what other options you can come up with to solve that. Right. As kind of a brief way for someone to go about it.
Yeah. So everyone.
Ryan, has that led you into get down the route of behavioral science and stuff like that? And looking into them types of things.
Yeah, like there's a big emphasis on behavioral psychology and behavioral science. In that level 2 precision nutrition course I did, especially just trying to get the best out of people, I suppose, and like understanding habits and habit formation. And I've started to get into studying acceptance and commitment therapy as well now.
Yeah, excellent.
I mean, there's lots of good like kind of therapeutic approaches out there, but that's one that I just kind of resonate and I said like that's class. As well as like CBT. I think CBT is quite good as well. But I find this acceptance commitment stuff very useful. There's a really good book on that, kind of the self-help book for ACT is The Happiness Trap. So I'd recommend anybody go and read that. Like it's really, really interesting. Just understanding how how to deal with, say, thoughts and emotions and how to actually live a life that's driven by the things that you value and that are important to you. It's only a short little read as well, and it's pretty simple. So I think people would get a lot from it. Like even if you've no issues necessarily, but I think everyone could stand to get something from it.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I've had a history of 10 years of disordered anxiety, panic attacks, agoraphobia and stuff like that. And I'm 3 years free of it now, which is great. And with the next therapy that I was going to choose was ACT, but I recovered. I never needed to go back and use it. But it's funny that me now coaching people through the panic attacks and stuff like that, the one thing I tell them is when you have a panic attack, accept it.
Yeah.
Don't.
Is the ACT, lads? I'm not really familiar with that.
It's just acceptance and commitment therapy. Is that right?
Yeah. It's usually referred to as ACT, which I've learned. So like CBT is not like kabut, and it's CBT, but ACT they just refer to as ACT. Some of the most prominent people in that field would be Steve Hayes. He's one of the biggest researchers in that, and then a fellow called Russ Harris, who is the author of The Happiness Trap. Like he's brought it to a lot of prominence. So the course I'm doing at the moment is run by Steve Hayes. But yeah, they talk about something in ACT called the struggle switch, which is kind of what you're referring to there, Glenn, which is like when you start to feel the panic coming on, you start to panic about the panic. Exactly. And it just makes the whole situation amplified and worse. And you can use that in a lot of contexts, like people having anxiety about their anxiety, or anger about their anxiety, or all these other emotions that can come into play rather than just the anxiety, or just the depression or something like that.
So what is their method? Another way, like CBT is kind of exposure, nearly becoming used to the environment that you're struggling with, or the issue that you're having. What is the kind of method of ACT? Is it to go and face things, or what exactly do they do? Like what's the kind of main overriding learning here?
It's, well, as the name suggests, it's mostly about acceptance. So if you're, so say in CBT, when you have, say, automatic negative thoughts or something, and they might use approaches to say, okay, let's go and challenge those and see if are they rational, are they true, etc., etc., which I think is useful. I use some of that in practice myself. But with ACT, it's more like, okay, I'm having these thoughts. It's just a thought. There's this technique in ACT called diffusion, which is it's the difference between me saying I'm a terrible person, right, and being fused to that thought, and me saying I'm having the thought that I'm a terrible person, which are separate. So there's a lot of like mindfulness techniques in it, so talking about the observing mind versus the thinking mind, which is going to be this problem solving brain that creates a lot of the problems ironically for you. But you probably know that kind of analogy in meditation and mindfulness stuff, like of the sky, and like your mind is the sky, and then the clouds roll by, so thoughts roll by, feelings roll by, which are always there, but you can always be there observing it from that standpoint. So there's a lot of those kind of methods in it, and like if you're having uncomfortable feelings, accepting them and giving them space. So rather than trying to like push them away or quickly cover them up with like binge eating or something,
bury them down or run away from them.
Yeah, you give them some space. There's like mindfulness techniques within that where it's like, okay, well, where is the feeling and what kind of shape is it in the body and what kind of sensations, is it hot or is it cold? And then it's like breathing exercise, like give it space to actually exist, because if you push it away, like it is going to come back. All right, so giving it space to exist, accepting that you feel that way, and going and taking action. So this is where the values driven action comes in, and taking action or behaving in such a way that kind of supports the life that you want to live, regardless of experiencing anxiety or whatever else is going on. So it's like, yes, I feel anxious, yes, I feel socially anxious, but I value, spending time with my friends out somewhere. So I'm going to go do that. Right. Yeah. With the kind of acknowledgement that, yes, I feel some social anxiety here. Again, using those techniques to kind of let it be. And then, a lot of it is directed towards the thoughts and stuff as well. So like one that I put up on my Instagram recently was like an example is like, okay, I'm going to close my eyes here. I'm going to think to myself, hey, you can't open your eyes. And it's like, well, okay, here my eyes are open again. Wow. So that just kind of shows you that these thoughts are just that. They are just thoughts. They don't have this massive power over you, right? So trying to separate yourself from them and saying like, okay, the thinking mind has brought me this thought. Thank you for sharing this with me. I'm not going to deem that to be like useful to me right now. So I'm just going to go and do this instead, right? In spite of these thoughts coming in. So it's really, really interesting, I think. Obviously, I wouldn't be studying it if I didn't think so, but
I think it's got to be it's coming in to be the next big form of therapy. It's having great results with panic attacks and intrusive thoughts. With that, so
deadly.
CBT and ACT will probably be the two best therapies for a lot of mental states that people go through, rather than just talk therapy, because they're that only gets people as far as things will allow them. CBT and ACT. CBT is well known at the moment, but ACT definitely in the next few years will be definitely up there.
Yeah, I think they call it like a third wave behavioral therapy or something, and I think CBT is like second wave. So a lot of these other therapies, are kind of based on CBT, which is itself kind of based on irrational emotive behavioral therapy. I don't know what they say for this, if they say REBT or if they say REBT, I don't know. But it is cool. So I'm gonna keep learning about it over the next few years, I would say, and get to the point where I'm like reasonably good at using it with people, I think, because I find it very useful in practice, and I can see the potential for it to use it like properly, but my skills aren't there yet, they aren't developed. So I do a bit of it, but I'm somewhat limited in how much I can do. Like,
it's interesting. Right, Brian, I'm conscious of the fact that you said you have a match and I have to go back to coaching soon. So I think we covered most of the stuff we wanted to cover today, and we've learned so much from you. So thanks for that, from us, and then anyone who watches it, I'm sure will be grateful for everything that you've told us today and everything you've helped us with. So thanks a lot for coming on.
And Brian, have you got like good friends? Like, I'd say your friends fucking love having you around, man. I'd listen to you all day.
I do, yeah, I think so. I have. I've been told that a lot.
Do you charge an hour for being around you, or what?
No, it's just like one of the benefits that come with just being my friend. So
Fair play, Brian.
Fortunately for everyone in that position. Yeah, sound lads, no, this is a good chat, and yeah, obviously I hope people get something from it. And yeah, if you want to contact me or get in touch, Brian Haonghusa, my Instagram. That's the only place I'm really active. And then obviously triagemethod.com or triage method on Instagram as well, if you want to find out more about the services and stuff. But funnily enough, I think I said this to you earlier, Lee. I'm on a mandated week off social media this week, so all of the staff, myself included, have to take a week off social media every 6 weeks. So this week is my week off. So yeah, I'm only tuning in to like check messages and stuff and inquiries, and that's about it. So yeah, it's good.
Enjoy a few days off, man. Thanks for coming on, Brian. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, lads.
Thanks.
Enjoy the match. Cheers.